Why you should run your games with more of a Cloak and Dagger style. Hello everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire, here with another DM quick tips for you. Today, talking about why you should run your games, particularly any of the D20 games like Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Starfinder, even D20 Modern is included in on this. But before we get into the exact details of why, if you're new here to the channel, go on down there, hit the subscribe button and become a regular member here at the Gamer's Den. Or, if you're already listed on such a legendary roster, then go on down and hit the like button and share the video far and wide to help us grow ever further, farther, and larger. But now, with all that done, let's go ahead and get into why you should run your games with more of a subtle Cloak and Dagger espionage kind of styling to it. And the reason for it is simple. One of the big failings, kind of a failing, it depends on how you look at it, but one of the larger flaws, and it's one that there's no shame in having for the D20 style games, especially Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder, is that they are focused very heavily on combat. Combat is almost exclusively what they're going to be centered around. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's fun, it's exciting, it's flashy, it can be a great time. And the stories that you can build around that are incredible. But that does also leave a certain amount of potential variety at the door. It's not introduced or integrated especially well in a lot of games. I mean, if you're adventuring, delving into dungeons, seeking out that dragon's lair so that you can get at its hoard, you're not really going to be focused a whole lot on diplomacy more often than not, or at least if you are, it's going to be at the start of an adventure, when you're negotiating for better prices, jockeying to get that number one item that is an absolute must-have on your list. And while there certainly is a place for those kinds of games and adventures, I mean, they're classic for a reason, it does mean that there can be a little bit of a lack in variety for how a game feels, and that's why I like to throw in so much espionage and subterfuge into my games. It's so that characters like bards or rogues that don't necessarily want to be focused so much on combat, they have an opportunity to shine and flex those extra skills that they have. This can be a little bit less of an issue in games like 5th edition or D20 Modern, but they still have a certain amount of a focus on combat. Though, again, 5th edition has mitigated that somewhat by making, for example, the Bard class that I referenced earlier. The Bard class, a lot of their combat abilities are tied with their charisma stat. A lot of their spell casting, it works off of their spell casting stat, the difficulty for the saving throws, and so, because that stat is charisma, that means that their spells are much more difficult to resist. But again, that just comes back around to there still is an emphasis on combat. So, to get a certain amount of variety in your games, it can be worthwhile to introduce these elements, just so that way players can flex their characters in a different way. For example, you can still keep fighters incorporated. Every single group is going to need a certain amount of muscle. I mean, my favorite example is a bard working with a rogue to lure enemy spies into an ambush in an alleyway. The enemy spies think they're the ones doing the ambushing, but because the bard and the rogue know they're coming, they can work together. They can go down into a dead-end alleyway, get cornered by the enemy spies, then all that needs to happen is their fighter friend steps around the corner, cracks his knuckles, and then draws out his sword, his hammer, whatever. So the fighter is going to be superior at combat to those enemy spies, at least in theory. But in either case, they're able to bring muscle to bear in a situation that calls for combat, but they're able to utilize their skill sets and do a bit of clever thinking and planning to draw their enemies into a situation where they can turn the tables and flip the ambush against them. But what do you think? Go on down to your thoughts below. Do you think introducing elements of subterfuge and espionage and spycraft, do you think that those are great ways of adding in some flavor and variety to your games? Or do you think I've completely missed the mark and I've been talking up just a bunch of random crap here? Go on down to the comments below and let me know your thoughts. Hit that like or dislike button. And as I said earlier, if you're new here to the channel, go on down and hit the subscribe button and share the video far and wide. But with all that said, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. Thank you all so very much for your time, and you all have yourselves a good night.